They say when a man stares into the abyss long enough, the abyss stares back. But what they don't tell you is what happens when you were born in that abyss, raised by its shadows, and forged in its unforgiving darkness. My name is Two Wolves Running, and this is the story of how I became the nightmare that hunted nightmares. The night everything changed, blood stained the winter snow crimson under a full moon that seemed to weep tears of rust. I was 16 winters old when the white men came to our camp near the Bitter Creek Valley. Not soldiers. Soldiers we could understand. Soldiers fought with some twisted sense of honor, however warped. No, these were something worse. Demons wearing human skin, led by a man they called the Pale Reaper. I can still smell the gunpowder mixed with burning sage, still hear my mother's final song cut short by thunder that came from steel and sulfur. My father, Black Elk Standing, was a warrior who had counted coup on enemies from 3 tribes and survived battles that would make grown men weep. But against the Pale Reaper's silver revolvers, he fell like a puppet with cut strings, 6 holes blooming red across his chest before he could even draw his war club. The massacre lasted less than an hour, but it carved an eternity into my soul. They said the Pale Reaper never missed, never showed mercy, and never spoke a word during his killings. They said he'd killed over 100 men, that his eyes were the color of dirty ice, and that he smiled while he pulled the trigger. They said a lot of things about Silas Blackwood, the fastest gun in the West. That night, I learned they were all true. I survived because my grandmother pushed me into the frozen creek and told me to let the water carry me away. As the current pulled me downstream, I watched our lodges burn like funeral pyres against the black sky. I floated for miles, half frozen, half dead, fully hollow. When I finally crawled onto the bank downstream, I was no longer Two Wolves Running, the boy who laughed and hunted deer with his father. That boy drowned in the Bitter Creek. What emerged was something colder than the winter water, harder than the stones beneath it. I spent 3 days walking through the snow with no food, no fire, just the rage keeping me warm. The spirits must have wanted me alive because I should have died a dozen times in that wilderness. Instead, I found myself at the trading post of a half-breed trapper named Ezekiel Crow. He was Cheyenne and French, cast out by both peoples, living alone in a cabin that smelled like animal pelts and whiskey. When he opened his door and saw me standing there, more ice than boy, more ghost than flesh, he didn't ask questions. He just stepped aside and let death walk into his home. Ezekiel Crow was a strange teacher for an even stranger student. He'd been a gunfighter once, back when the territories were even wilder than they were now. A bad deal in Tombstone had cost him his right eye and his reputation, but not his skills. When I told him what I wanted, what I needed to become, he studied me with that one good eye like he was reading prophecy written in scars I hadn't earned yet. "You want to kill the Pale Reaper," he said. It wasn't a question. "Boy, men twice your age with 10 times your experience have tried. They're all feeding worms now. Blackwood ain't just fast, he's death given form, the devil's own right hand." "Then teach me to be the left," I replied. Something in my voice made him pause. Maybe he heard the echo of the boy who died in that creek. Maybe he recognized a fellow dead man still walking. Whatever he heard, it made him nod slowly, take a long pull from his whiskey bottle, and say the words that would define the next 4 years of my life. "All right then. But understand this. If I'm going to teach you to kill a legend, you can't be human anymore. You gotta become something else entirely." The training was biblical in its cruelty. Ezekiel believed the body was just a temple, and temples needed to be consecrated in suffering. Every morning before dawn, I ran through the mountain passes with stones tied to my ankles. Every afternoon, I practiced drawing and firing until my hands bled, and then kept practicing until they stopped bleeding because they'd grown too tough for blood. Every evening, he taught me to read the white man's books, to speak their language without accent, to understand their laws and their thinking. "Know your enemy better than he knows himself," he'd say. But the guns. Oh, the guns became extensions of my very soul. Ezekiel started me with old rusty pistols, that misfired more than they shot. If you can master a weapon that betrays you, he explained, imagine what you'll do with one that obeys. We moved to rifles, shotguns, everything that could deal death, but always we returned to the revolver, the weapon of the quick and the damned, the weapon of the Pale Reaper. By my second year with Ezekiel, I could draw and put 6 rounds in a playing card at 20 paces in less than 3 seconds. By my third year, I could do it blindfolded, guided only by sound. By my fourth year, I didn't need the card anymore. I could hear the wind whisper where my bullet would fly, feel the weight of destiny in my trigger finger. I had become what Ezekiel called ghost-touched, neither fully in this world nor the next, but walking the line between, where the fastest guns live in that split second before the hammer falls. But speed wasn't enough. Ezekiel taught me something the white men had forgotten in their rush towards so-called civilization. He taught me the old ways, the warrior ways, how to move through a forest without disturbing a single leaf, how to track a man across solid rock, how to read fear in an enemy's eyes and use it like a weapon, how to embrace pain until it became just another companion, no more bothering than a shadow. The Pale Reaper is faster than you'll ever be, Ezekiel told me during my final lesson. He's been killing since before you were born. But he's got one weakness, same weakness all legends have. He believes his own myth. He thinks he's untouchable, unkillable. You, boy, you got nothing to lose because you already died in that creek. Dead men don't feel fear. And a fearless man with a gun is the most dangerous thing in this world, or any other. On the night of my 20th winter, exactly 4 years after the massacre, Ezekiel gave me a gift. 2 custom-made Colt peacemakers, the frames engraved with Cheyenne symbols of protection and vengeance, the grips carved from the horns of a white buffalo, and the barrels blackened like the night sky. They were beautiful and terrible, instruments of fate disguised as firearms. These belonged to a Comanche gunfighter named Stands and Fire, Ezekiel said. He killed 37 men before he met his end. Guns got memory, boy. They remember every soul they've taken. These are hungry for one more. Feed them well. That night, Ezekiel and I shared whiskey by his fire one last time. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. We both knew I was leaving in the morning to hunt the Pale Reaper. We both knew I probably wouldn't come back. But we also knew that some things matter more than survival. Some debts can only be paid in blood and gunpowder. Some songs can only be sung in the language of vengeance. I started my hunt in a place called Redemption's Fall, though there was nothing redemptive about it. It was a cancer of civilization, a town that had been born from gold fever and sustained itself on sin and suffering. The main street was mud and horseshit, flanked by buildings that leaned against each other like drunks trying to stay upright. Saloons, brothels, and gambling dens outnumbered churches 10 to 1. It was exactly the kind of place where predators like the Pale Reaper came to collect their bounties and spend their blood money. I arrived on a Tuesday, which the locals called Devil's Day, because that's when the worst trouble always seemed to find their town. I was dressed like a drifter, my Cheyenne heritage hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat and a duster coat that had seen better decades. The revolvers hung low on my hips, and I'd learned to walk with that particular swagger that said, "I'm dangerous, but I might be manageable." It was a lie. I was far past manageable. The saloon was called the Hanged Man's Last Laugh, and it smelled like every bad decision ever made under its roof. Tobacco smoke hung in the air thick enough to choke on, mixing with the sour stench of spilled beer and desperate hope. I took a corner table where I could see both doors and ordered whiskey I had no intention of drinking. Information was what I thirsted for. The bartender was a grizzled man with hands like weathered leather and eyes that had seen too much. His name was Dutch, and he had that particular wariness of someone who'd survived this long by knowing when to talk and when to shut the hell up. I laid a gold coin on the bar, more than enough for a week's worth of rot-gut whiskey. His eyes flicked from the coin to my face. "I'm looking for information about a man," I said quietly. "They call him the Pale Reaper." The entire saloon seemed to go silent, though I knew that was just my imagination. Still, Dutch's face went a shade paler, which on his already pale face was quite an achievement. He looked at the coin, then at me, then at the coin again, like he was weighing gold against his own mortality. "You got a death wish, stranger?" he finally asked. "Maybe, or maybe I got a debt to pay. Either way, I need to know where to find him." Dutch leaned in close, his whiskey breath hot on my face. "Blackwood don't stay nowhere long. But last I heard, he was up in the mining camps of Skull Ridge, doing wet work for the Crimson Company. They're trying to force out the independent prospectors, and Blackwood's their angel of death. Been 3 murders up there in as many weeks, all of them shot clean through the heart at high noon. That's his signature, you know. Always at noon, always through the heart. Says the sun should witness God's work. The blasphemy of it made my blood boil, but I kept my face neutral. How do I get to Skull Ridge? 2 days' ride north up through the Widow's Canyon. But stranger, let me give you some free advice. Whatever Blackwood did to you, whatever you think you owe him, it ain't worth your life. I've seen 20 good men try to collect on bounties against that devil. All 20 are feeding worms now. He don't miss, he don't hesitate, and he sure as hell don't show mercy." "Good," I replied, standing up and leaving the coin on the bar. "Neither do I." I left the saloon and made my way to the livery stable, where I'd left my horse, a paint mare I'd named Silent Thunder. She was the only living thing I'd allowed myself to care about in 4 years, and even that was probably a mistake. Caring made you vulnerable, and vulnerability got you killed. Still, she'd been loyal and sure-footed through mountain passes that would have broken lesser animals. I owed her that much recognition. As I was checking her saddle, I heard the unmistakable sound of a revolver's hammer being cocked behind my head. I froze, calculating angles and odds in the fraction of a second that separated life from death. "You're asking a lot of questions about dangerous men, stranger," a woman's voice said. "That makes you either very brave or very stupid. Which is it?" I turned slowly, hands visible and away from my guns. The woman holding the Remington on me was maybe 30, with auburn hair and eyes like green glass. She wore men's clothes and wore them well, with a deputy's star pinned to her vest. But what caught my attention was the way she held that pistol, comfortable and confident. This wasn't her first time pointing a gun at someone's head. "Maybe both," I answered honestly. Her eyes narrowed, studying me with an intensity that felt like being dissected. "You're Indian." "Cheyenne, if I had to guess from the way you carry yourself. But you speak English without an accent and you wear white man's clothes like you were born to them. You're an interesting contradiction, stranger." "I'm a man with business to attend to. Nothing more, nothing less." "Business with Silas Blackwood," she said flatly. "Let me save you some trouble. Whatever you're planning, it won't work. I'm Deputy Marshal Sarah Redding, and I've been tracking Blackwood for 2 years on behalf of the territorial government. He's wanted for 16 confirmed murders, and probably 3 times that many we can't prove. Every lawman, bounty hunter, and revenge seeker who's gone after him has ended up in a pine box. What makes you think you'll be different?" I met her eyes and let her see something of what lived behind mine. Whatever she saw there made her take a small step back, though her gun never wavered. "Because I'm already dead, Marshal. I've been dead for 4 years, and dead men are very hard to kill twice." Marshal Sarah Redding didn't lower her gun, but something shifted in her eyes. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. She'd seen enough death to recognize when it looked back at her wearing a man's face. After a long moment, she holstered her Remington and sighed like she was making peace with a very bad decision. "The hanged man's last laugh serves food upstairs," she said. "Meet me there in an hour. If you're serious about going after Blackwood, we need to talk. And stranger, if you're planning to rob this town or cause trouble, know that I'm fast enough to make good on that threat in my holster." "I don't doubt it, Marshal." She left me there in the livery, and I spent the next hour tending to Silent Thunder and considering my options. Everything in my training told me to work alone, that partnerships were just liabilities waiting to betray you. But Ezekiel had also taught me to recognize opportunities when they presented themselves. A territorial marshal would have access to information I couldn't get easily, And if she'd been tracking Blackwood for 2 years, she might know patterns and habits that could be useful. The room upstairs was sparse, just a table, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out over Redemption's Fall's sorry excuse for a main street. Marshall Redding was already there, with a plate of something that might have been food, and definitely was moving. She gestured to the other chair and pushed a plate toward me. "You should eat," she said. "Can't hunt devils on an empty stomach." I sat, but didn't touch the food. Old habits from my training. Never eat or drink anything you didn't prepare yourself when you're in enemy territory. And everywhere was enemy territory. She noticed, but didn't comment. Just took a bite of her own meal and watched me with those sharp green eyes. 4 years ago, she began without preamble. Silas Blackwood led a raid on a Cheyenne camp near Bitter Creek Valley. Killed 43 people, mostly women and children. The territorial government couldn't prove he did it. Not legally anyway, but everyone knew. That massacre is what finally put him on the wanted posters, though by then he'd already killed so many that it was just one more crime in a catalog of evil. My face must have shown something, because she nodded slowly. "You were there. You survived." Surviving is a generous word for what I did. You're 2 wolves running, the only survivor. The army looked for you, but it was like you'd been swallowed by the wilderness itself. Most people thought you died of exposure. She leaned forward, elbows on the table. But here you are, 4 years later, wearing custom iron and asking questions about Blackwood. Let me guess. You spent those years learning how to kill him. There was no point in lying. "Yes." "Good," she said, and the word surprised me. "Because I'm done playing by the rules. The territorial government wants Blackwood brought in for trial, wants to make an example of him in front of a judge and jury. But the truth is, he's never going to see the inside of a courtroom. He's too fast, too smart, and too well connected. The Crimson Mining Company pays him in gold, and gold buys a lot of blind eyes and convenient amnesia." "Uzo, what do you want, Marshall?" "I want him dead," she said simply, and the honesty of it was almost shocking. "I want him dead because he's a rabid dog that needs putting down. And I want him dead because he killed my brother 3 years ago in Deadwood. Shot him in the back during a card game and walked away laughing. My brother was 19 years old, barely old enough to grow a proper beard, and Blackwood killed him over a disputed poker hand worth maybe $40. I saw my own rage reflected in her eyes, and something inside me recognized a kindred spirit. We were both dead in our own ways, both driven by ghosts, both willing to sacrifice whatever remained of our souls to balance the scales. It was a terrible thing to have in common, but it was something. "I can't bring him in for trial," I said. "That's not justice I'm after." "I know. And officially, I'm going to try my damnedest to arrest you after you kill him. But unofficially, I'm going to help you get close enough to take your shot. After that, whatever happens, happens." She pulled out a folded map and spread it across the table. "Skull Ridge is here, about 40 miles north. The Crimson Company has a camp set up at the main mine entrance. Blackwood usually stays at the foreman's house, a big place on the hill overlooking the workers. He's been killing anyone who resists the company's land grabs, one shot through the heart at high noon. Every 3 days like clockwork." "Why noon?" I asked. "Nobody knows for sure. Some say it's because that's when shadows are smallest, nowhere to hide. Others say he likes the poetry of it, death at the brightest part of the day. I think he's just a theatrical bastard who likes making a show of it." She traced a finger along the map. "The next killing is scheduled for 2 days from now, assuming the pattern holds. That gives us just enough time to get there and set up." "Us? You didn't think I was letting you do this alone, did you? Look, I know you've been training and I can see you're dangerous. But Blackwood has survived this long because he's careful. He has people watching his back, checking the angles, making sure nobody gets the drop on him. You go in alone, you're dead before you clear leather. But if we work together, if we're smart about this, maybe, just maybe, we can end him." I studied the map, my mind already working through approaches and contingencies. Ezekiel had trained me to think like a hunter, to see the battlefield before I ever stepped onto it. "What's the terrain like around Skull Ridge?" "Rough, Mountains on 3 sides, the mine itself on the 4th. Only one good approach, a road that winds up from the valley. They'll see us coming from miles away. She tapped a spot on the map. But there's an old mining shaft here, abandoned about 5 years ago when it collapsed. If it's still accessible, we could come up through the mountain itself, right into the heart of their camp. And if it's not accessible, then we die in a rock slide instead of by gunfire. Still sounds better than letting Blackwood keep breathing. I almost smiled at that. Almost. When do we leave? Dawn. I've got supplies at my boarding house and we'll need to travel light but prepared. Bring those fancy pistols of yours and whatever else you can shoot straight. And stranger, one more thing. She looked at me hard. When we face him, when it comes down to that final moment, you don't hesitate. Men who hesitate against Silas Blackwood don't live to regret it. You draw, you fire, you kill. That's the only way this ends with us walking away. Marshall, I said, standing up and meeting her eyes. I haven't hesitated since the night my family died. That boy who might have hesitated drowned in Bitter Creek. What you're looking at is what crawled out of the water. And I promise you, when I face the Pale Reaper, when I look him in those ice-cold eyes, I'm going to send him to whatever hell is waiting for men like him. She nodded, satisfied. Good. Then get some rest. Tomorrow we ride for Skull Ridge. Tomorrow we either kill a legend or become one more cautionary tale. Either way, at least we'll die trying. We left Redemption's Fall before the sun fully broke the horizon, riding through mist that clung to the valley floor like the ghosts of all the broken dreams this territory had swallowed. Marshall Redding rode a dun gelding with the kind of sure-footedness that came from mountain breeding, and she sat in the saddle like she was born there. We didn't talk much, which suited me fine. Words were just another distraction, and I needed to keep my mind sharp for what was coming. The trail north took us through country that got progressively more hostile as we climbed in elevation. Widow's Canyon earned its name from the number of travelers who'd been ambushed in its narrow passes by bandits, bears, or bad luck. The rock walls rose up on either side of us like the ribs of some massive dead thing, and our horses' hooves echoed off the stone in a rhythm that sounded too much like a funeral march. Around midday, we stopped to water the horses at a creek that ran red with mineral deposits. While the animals drank, Marshall Redding pulled out a leather portfolio and handed me a photograph, faded and worn at the edges. "That's him," she said simply. I stared at the image of Silas Blackwood, my first clear look at the man I'd been preparing to kill for 4 years. He was tall and lean, with the kind of build that suggested he was made of iron cables and bad intentions. His face was angular and hard, with high cheekbones and a jaw that could have been carved from granite. But it was his eyes that captured you. Even in the faded photograph, even through time and distance, those eyes were like looking into a frozen lake. Empty. Absolute. Final. He wore all black except for a white shirt, and his hands rested on the grips of his silver-plated revolvers, with the ease of a man who considered them natural extensions of his body. There was no mercy in that face, no hint of humanity or compassion. This was a man who'd killed so often and so casually that death had become just another business transaction. I'd spent 4 years imagining what he looked like, building him up into a demon in my mind. The reality was somehow worse because he looked so ordinary, so human. Evil should look monstrous. Instead, it wore a man's face and smiled for photographs. "How many?" I asked quietly. "How many has he killed?" Marshall Redding took back the photograph and stared at it like she was trying to memorize every detail. "Officially, 16 that we can prove with witnesses and evidence. Unofficially, probably close to 100. Maybe more. He's been killing for 12 years and he's not shy about his work. Some say he keeps notches on his gun belt, one for each kill. If that's true, he'd need a lot of belts. Does he ever miss? Never. Not once that anyone's recorded. He's either the luckiest gunfighter who ever lived, or he's genuinely touched by something unholy. My brother tried to draw on him. Got his hand halfway to his holster before Blackwood put 2 rounds through his chest. The witnesses said Blackwood never even seemed to move, Just suddenly his guns were out and firing like they'd teleported from their holsters to his hands. It was over in less than a second. I handed back the photograph and remounted Silent Thunder. He's mortal. Mortal things can be killed. You sound certain. I am. Because if he can't be killed, then there's no justice in this world or any other. And I've seen too much suffering to believe in a universe that cruel. We rode on through the afternoon, climbing higher into the mountains. The air got thinner and colder, and by the time the sun started its descent toward the western horizon, we were both feeling the altitude. Marshal Redding led us off the main trail and into a dense stand of pine trees where we made camp for the night. No fire, she insisted. The Crimson Company had scouts everywhere, and a fire could be seen for miles in these mountains. We ate cold jerky and hardtack in silence, huddled in our bedrolls against the October cold. Above us, stars appeared one by one until the sky was a tapestry of silver light. I'd forgotten how beautiful the stars could be up here, away from any town or settlement. For a moment, just a moment, I let myself remember lying under stars like these with my father, listening to him tell stories about how the sky was a great hunting ground, where the spirits of warriors rode forever in pursuit of the sacred buffalo. "Tell me about your family," Marshal Redding said quietly, breaking into my thoughts. "Why?" "Because I need to know I'm doing the right thing, helping you. I need to know this is about justice, not just revenge. Does it matter? Either way, Blackwood dies." "It matters to me," she insisted. "Revenge is just feeding darkness. Justice is trying to restore balance. I've seen what pure revenge does to people. It hollows them out until there's nothing left but hate and the need to hurt something. If that's all you are, if that's all this is, then maybe I should just arrest you now and save us both the trouble." I was quiet for a long moment, weighing whether to trust her with something I hadn't spoken aloud in 4 years. Finally, I spoke, and my voice sounded strange to my own ears, like it was coming from someone else. My father was Black Elk Standing. He taught me to track, to hunt, to read the stories written in the earth. My mother was Mourning Dove. She made the best fry bread in our camp and sang songs that could make stones weep. I had a younger sister, Little Rain. She was 7 winters old and wanted to be a warrior, even though my mother told her girls didn't usually follow that path. She'd practice with a stick bow and arrow every day. So serious, so determined. The words came easier now, bleeding out of me like poison from a wound. The night they died, Little Rain was sleeping next to me. When the shooting started, I tried to protect her, tried to shield her with my body. But a bullet found her anyway. She died in my arms, asking me why the thunder was so loud. I told her it was just a storm, that everything would be okay. I lied to my sister with her last breath. Marshal Redding didn't say anything, and I was grateful for that. There were no words that could fix what was broken, no platitudes that could fill the void. We sat there in the darkness under the stars, 2 broken people united by loss and the need to make one small corner of the world a little less evil, even if it cost us our souls to do it. "Tomorrow," I said finally, "when we reach Skull Ridge, I'm going to look Silas Blackwood in the eyes and I'm going to make him answer for every life he's taken. Not just my family, not just your brother, every single person whose blood is on his hands. And then I'm going to kill him, and maybe, just maybe, some part of me that died in Bitter Creek can finally rest. And if he kills you first, then at least I died trying. That's more than most people get." We didn't speak again that night. When dawn finally broke over the mountains, we packed up our camp and rode on toward Skull Ridge, toward destiny, toward the reckoning that had been 4 years in the making. The path ahead wound through increasingly treacherous terrain, and I knew that by the time the sun reached its zenith tomorrow, either Silas Blackwood would be dead, or I would be. There was no middle ground, no compromise. Just 2 killers walking toward each other on a collision course that could only end in blood and gun smoke. We reached the abandoned mine shaft just before midnight, guided by moonlight that turned the mountain landscape into something from a fever dream. The entrance was half collapsed, hidden behind a curtain of dead brush and surrounded by the rusted remnants of mining equipment. Marshal Redding dismounted and studied the opening with a critical eye. "Doesn't look promising," she muttered, pulling out a small lantern and striking a match. The flame guttered in the cold wind before casting dancing shadows across the rock face. But it's our best shot at getting close without being seen. I secured Silent Thunder to a dead tree and checked my revolvers for the 100th time. The weight of them had become so familiar that they felt like natural extensions of my arms, an extra set of limbs designed for dealing death. Everything Ezekiel had taught me had led to this moment, and I could almost hear his voice in the wind. When you finally face him, remember, it's not about being faster. It's about being inevitable. The tunnel entrance was narrow, forcing us to move single file with Marshal Redding leading the way with her lantern held high. The air inside was damp and thick, tasting of minerals and decay. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a constant rhythm that sounded like a clock counting down to something terrible. The walls were shored up with ancient timbers that groaned under the weight of the mountain above us, and more than once I saw places where the ceiling had partially collapsed, leaving piles of rubble that we had to carefully navigate around. "This whole thing could come down on our heads," I observed. "Cheerful thought, thanks for that." Marshal Redding moved her lantern to illuminate what looked like a branching passage. According to the old mining maps I studied, this shaft should connect to the main Crimson Company tunnels about half a mile in. If we're lucky, we'll come up right in their operation. And if we're not lucky, we suffocate in a tomb of our own making. But look at it this way. At least Blackwood won't get the satisfaction of killing us. We pushed deeper into the mountain, and with each step, I felt the weight of stone and earth pressing down on me. It wasn't fear exactly, but a profound awareness of my own mortality. In here, my speed with a gun meant nothing. A cave-in didn't care about how many hours I'd practiced my draw. The mountain was the ultimate equalizer, and it reminded me that for all my training and preparation, I was still just flesh and bone. After what felt like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, we reached a section where the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Marshal Redding swept her lantern around and we both froze. The chamber was filled with bones, human bones. Dozens of skeletons lay scattered across the floor, some still partially clothed in the rotted remnants of miners' garb. "Jesus Christ," Marshal Redding whispered. "What happened here?" I knelt beside the nearest skeleton and examined it carefully. The skull showed signs of trauma, a crushing blow that had caved in the side. Moving to another body, I found similar injuries. They were murdered, all of them. This wasn't a mining accident. "The Crimson Company," she said, her voice hard as the stone around us. "They must have killed these men to claim this mine, buried them here where nobody would find them." I stood up, feeling rage building in my chest like a storm. How many atrocities had been committed in the name of gold? How much blood had soaked into this mountain? The bones around us were a testament to the casual cruelty that men like Blackwood enabled, the evil they served for a few pieces of silver. "Come on," I said. "We're close now, I can feel it." Beyond the bone chamber, the tunnel began to show signs of more recent use. The timbers were newer, the walls showed marks of modern tools, and we could hear the distant sound of machinery somewhere ahead. Marshal Redding extinguished her lantern as dim light began to filter in from somewhere above. We moved in near total darkness now, feeling our way along the walls, our breathing synchronized as we crept closer to the heart of the Crimson Company's operation. Finally, we reached a vertical shaft with crude wooden ladders leading upward. Light spilled down from above along with voices and the sounds of men at work. Marshal Redding touched my arm and gestured upward. I nodded. This was it. Once we climbed that ladder, there would be no turning back. We ascended slowly, carefully, testing each rung before putting our full weight on it. The shaft opened into a storage room filled with mining equipment and supplies. Through a crack in the door, I could see the main camp beyond. Dozens of rough buildings arranged around the mine entrance, with the foreman's house exactly where Marshal Redding had said it would be, perched on a hill like a king's castle overlooking his domain. "We wait until morning," she whispered. "Let them settle into their routines. Blackwood always takes his walk around the camp at mid-morning, checking on the operations. That's when he's most vulnerable, when he's moving and his attention is divided. We settled in to wait among the mining equipment, and the hours crawled by like wounded animals. I used the time to center myself, to go through the meditation techniques Ezekiel had taught me. I visualized the confrontation 1,000 times, seeing every possible outcome, preparing for every contingency. By the time dawn light began to filter through the cracks in the walls, I had achieved a state of perfect calm. The fear was gone, the doubt was gone. Even the rage had cooled into something harder and more focused. I was ready. Marshal Redding checked her weapons one last time and looked at me with those green eyes that had seen too much death. Last chance to walk away. We could still leave, report what we found here, let the law handle it. The law had its chance for 4 years. Now it's my turn. She nodded, accepting that. Then let's kill this devil and make the world a little less dark. We moved out of the storage room as the camp began to wake up around us. Workers stumbled from bunkhouses, heading toward the mess hall for breakfast. We stayed in the shadows, 2 ghosts moving through a world that didn't know it was about to witness something biblical in its violence. I could feel my heartbeat steady and strong, counting down the moments until I would finally face the man who had haunted my nightmares for 4 long years. Somewhere in that camp, Silas Blackwood was waking up, never knowing that death had crawled up through the mountain itself to find him. Never knowing that the last survivor of Bitter Creek had spent 4 years becoming a weapon with one purpose: to make him pay for every drop of blood he'd spilled. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and as it did, I felt time itself slow down, stretching each moment into something elastic and strange. This was the feeling Ezekiel had described, the sensation of stepping outside normal time into that space where gunfighters lived. The world became sharp and clear, every detail standing out with perfect clarity. I could hear individual voices in the camp, smell bacon cooking, feel the weight of my revolvers like old friends reminding me they were there. And then, as mid-morning approached, I saw him. Silas Blackwood emerged from the foreman's house, dressed all in black as he was in the photograph, those silver revolvers catching the sunlight like stars. Even from a distance, I could see the easy confidence in his movements, the absolute certainty of a man who had never met his equal. He lit a cigarette and began his walk through the camp, and I knew with perfect clarity that this was the moment. This was where 4 years of suffering and training would be tested. This was where I would either become the warrior my father had wanted me to be, or die trying. Silas Blackwood moved through the camp like he owned it, because in every way that mattered, he did. Men stepped aside when they saw him coming, their eyes going to the ground, their conversations dying mid-sentence. Fear followed him like a physical presence, an invisible cloud that warned everyone this was a predator in their midst. He stopped occasionally to inspect equipment or speak quietly to the foreman, and every word he spoke seemed to carry weight that could crush a man's spirit. Marshal Redding and I shadowed him from cover, moving from building to building, staying just out of sight. She'd been right about one thing: he wasn't alone. 2 hard-looking men with rifles followed him at a discreet distance, their eyes constantly scanning for threats. These would be problems that needed solving before I could get to Blackwood himself. "The one on the left is Buck Brennan," Marshal Redding whispered. "Wanted in 3 territories for murder. The other one is Jack Snake Eye Morrison. Killed his own brother over a woman. They're Blackwood's insurance policy. How do you want to play this? I'll draw off the guards. You get Blackwood. But you'll only have seconds before they realize what's happening and come running back. Seconds is all I'll need." She gave me a long look, and I wondered what she saw in my face. Whatever it was made her nod slowly, like she was making peace with something. "You know, if we survive this, I'm probably going to have to arrest you. Killing a man in cold blood, even a man like Blackwood, that's still murder in the eyes of the law. If we survive this, Marshal, you can do whatever your conscience tells you to do. But first, let's make sure that bastard doesn't take one more innocent life." We split up. Marshal Redding circled around to approach the guards from their blind side while I found a position behind a stack of lumber that gave me a clear line of sight to where Blackwood stood, smoking his cigarette and surveying his domain like a king. The sun was climbing toward its zenith. In less than an hour, it would be noon. And if Marshal Redding's intelligence was correct, Blackwood would be executing another resistor. I planned to change that schedule. I watched Marshal Redding make her approach. She'd pinned her marshal's badge prominently on her vest and walked with the official bearing of law enforcement. The guards saw her coming and immediately tensed, rifles coming up slightly but not quite aiming. She called out something I couldn't hear from this distance, and the guards moved toward her, leaving Blackwood temporarily alone. It was now or never. I stepped out from behind the lumber, my hands hovering over my revolvers, and I spoke loudly enough that my voice carried across the yard. "Silas Blackwood." He turned slowly, the cigarette still dangling from his lips, and those ice-blue eyes found me. For a moment, we just looked at each other across 20 yards of space that might as well have been the distance between Earth and hell. His face showed no surprise, no concern, just a mild curiosity like I was an interesting insect he'd found. "Do I know you, boy?" His voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. 4 years ago, Bitter Creek Valley. You killed 43 Cheyenne men, women, and children. I'm the one who survived. Something flickered in those dead eyes. Recognition, maybe, or amusement. He took a drag from his cigarette and smiled, and that smile was the most horrible thing I'd ever seen because it was genuine. He actually enjoyed remembering the massacre. "The boy who floated away in the creek. I wondered if you'd frozen to death." He dropped the cigarette and ground it under his boot. "I remember your father. Put 6 rounds in him before he even knew I was there. Good-looking man. Died poorly, though. They all did. The rage threatened to explode out of me, but I forced it down, channeled it into focus. This was what he wanted, to make me angry, to make me sloppy." I could hear Ezekiel's voice in my head. "Anger makes you fast, but focus makes you deadly." "My name is Two Wolves Running," I said clearly. "I've spent 4 years preparing for this moment. I've killed the boy I was and become something else, something designed specifically to end you. Today, at this place, you answer for every life you've taken." Blackwood laughed, and it sounded like bones rattling in a box. "You spent 4 years learning to die, boy. That's all you've done. You think you're the first to come after me with revenge in your heart? You think you're special? I've killed over 100 men, and 40 of them were gunfighters who thought they were fast. You're just another grave I'll forget about before dinner." Behind him, I could see Marshal Redding had the guards' attention fully now, her hand on her own weapon, ready to draw if they made a move. The camp had gone silent. Workers had frozen where they stood, sensing that something momentous was about to happen. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "You talk too much," I said. "Draw." For the first time, real interest lit in Blackwood's eyes. "You're calling me out? Here? Now?" He glanced at the sun, not quite at its zenith. "It's not noon yet, boy. I always do my work at noon. I don't care about your theatrical bullshit. I care about justice. Draw or die like a coward." That got to him. His jaw tightened, and his hands moved to hover over his silver revolvers. The entire world seemed to slow down, time stretching like taffy. I could see every detail with perfect clarity. The sweat on Blackwood's temple, the way his coat hung open to give him easy access to his guns, the tiny shift in his weight as he prepared to draw. I could feel my own heartbeat, slow and steady, counting down the last seconds of his life. "Your funeral, boy," Blackwood said. And then everything happened at once. His hands moved, faster than anything I'd ever seen in my life. The silver revolvers seemed to teleport from their holsters to his hands, hammers already cocking back. But in that infinite moment between intention and action, in that space where gunfighters lived and died, I found something faster. Not speed, but certainty. Not reaction, but inevitability. My hands moved without conscious thought, following paths they'd traced 10,000 times in practice. The black peacemakers cleared leather, and the world exploded in thunder and smoke. I didn't aim. I'd spent 4 years making my body remember, making the motion as natural as breathing. The guns became extensions of my will, and my will was absolute. I fired 6 times, 3 from each revolver, so fast that the reports blended into one continuous roar. Blackwood's silver revolvers fired too, and I felt something tug at my coat, felt heat pass by my face. But I didn't care because I was focused on only one thing: making sure he died. The smoke cleared. Silas Blackwood stood there for a moment, his silver revolvers still raised, his eyes wide with something that might have been surprise. 3 dark spots appeared on his chest, forming a triangle over his heart. 3 more hits, one through his right shoulder, one through his left, one that had creased his throat. Blood bloomed across his black shirt like dark flowers opening to the sun. "Impossible," he whispered. Then he fell, and the fastest gun in the West hit the ground and moved no more. The silence that followed the gunfire was absolute. For a heartbeat, for an eternity, nobody moved. The camp seemed frozen in amber. Every worker, every guard, every living thing caught in a moment of stunned disbelief. Silas Blackwood, the Pale Reaper, the unkillable legend, lay sprawled in the dirt with his life's blood seeping into the dry earth. Then chaos erupted. Buck Brennan and Snake Eye Morrison broke away from Marshall Redding, their rifles coming up fast. But she was faster. Her Remington barked twice, and Brennan went down clutching his leg. Morrison got off a wild shot that went nowhere near anyone before Marshall Redding put a round through his shoulder, spinning him like a top. Both guards hit the ground, wounded but alive, their weapons falling from nerveless fingers. "Everyone freeze!" Marshall Redding's voice cut through the chaos like a whip crack. "I'm a territorial marshal, and this camp is now under federal authority. Any man who reaches for a weapon will be shot." I stood over Blackwood's body, my revolvers still smoking, still trained on him even though I knew he was dead. Had to be dead. Nothing could survive 6 hits from a peacemaker at 20 yards. But legends had a way of refusing to die, and I'd learned never to trust anything until you'd checked the body. I knelt beside him and pressed my fingers to his throat. No pulse. His ice blue eyes stared sightlessly at the sky, and I wondered what he saw in those final moments. Did he see the faces of all the people he'd killed? Did he see the hell that was waiting for him? Or did he see nothing at all? Just the darkness that he'd dealt to so many others? "Is he dead?" Marshall Redding called out, still holding the camp at gunpoint. "He's dead." A sound rose from the gathered workers, something between a cheer and a sigh of relief. The fear that had hung over this camp like a shroud suddenly lifted, and men began to talk excitedly, nervously, the words tumbling over each other. The monster was dead. The nightmare was over. But for me, there was no relief. I'd spent 4 years preparing for this moment, had built my entire existence around the need for vengeance, and now that it was done, I felt empty. Killing Blackwood hadn't brought my family back. It hadn't healed the wound in my soul. It had just made the world one murderer lighter, which was something, but not the everything I'd hoped it would be. Marshall Redding moved through the crowd, deputizing workers to help secure the wounded guards and maintain order. She was good at her job. I'd give her that. Within minutes, she'd organized the chaos into something resembling order, getting statements from witnesses and collecting evidence of the Crimson Company's crimes. I walked away from Blackwood's body and found a quiet place behind one of the buildings. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline draining away and leaving me feeling hollowed out. I'd been shot at, I realized. Blackwood had gotten off at least 4 rounds, and at least 2 of them had come close enough to mark me. There was a hole in my coat where a bullet had passed through, missing flesh by inches. My hat was gone, shot clear off my head. I'd been seconds away from death and hadn't even realized it in the moment. "You're bleeding." I looked up to see Marshall Redding standing there, holding a medical kit. I followed her gaze down to my side and saw that she was right. One of Blackwood's bullets had creased my ribs, not deep enough to be serious, but enough to paint my shirt red. I hadn't even felt it. "Sit down before you fall down," she ordered, and there was something in her voice that reminded me of my mother. "You just killed the fastest gun in the West. Try not to die from a scratch afterward." I sat while she cleaned and bandaged the wound, her hands efficient and sure. "How many times did he hit me?" "Twice. The ribs and your hat. The other 2 shots went wide. You know what that means? That I'm lucky. That you rattled him. Silas Blackwood never missed, but you were so fast, so certain that he flinched. Just a little, just enough. In all his years of killing, he'd never faced someone who didn't show fear, who didn't hesitate. You broke his perfect record before you broke him." She finished with the bandage and sat back. "How does it feel?" "What?" "Getting your revenge. Killing the man who murdered your family. How does it feel?" I thought about lying, about saying it felt good, felt righteous, felt like justice. But she'd earned honesty from me. "It feels like I've been walking toward a cliff for 4 years, and I just stepped off. I don't know how to land. I don't know what comes next." Marshall Redding nodded slowly. "That's the problem with revenge. It's a destination, not a journey. Once you get there, you realize there's nothing beyond it, just emptiness." She stood and offered me her hand. "But maybe that's not all there is. Maybe what comes next is figuring out how to be human again, how to live for something other than death." I took her hand and let her pull me to my feet. I wouldn't know where to start. Neither did I when I lost my brother, but I figured it out, one day at a time. And you will too. She hesitated, then added, "I'm going to have to take you in, you know. What you did was justified, and Blackwood was wanted dead or alive. But there are still forms to fill out, statements to take. The territorial government will want to talk to you. I understand. But," she continued, "it's going to take me at least a week to get all the evidence collected from this camp, to document the crimes the Crimson Company committed here. A week is a long time. A man could ride a long way in a week if he was so inclined." I looked at her, understanding what she was offering. An escape, a chance to disappear before the law caught up with me. She was giving me a gift, and we both knew it. "Why?" I asked. "Because you did what I couldn't. Because you put down a rabid dog that needed putting down. And because I think you deserve a chance to find out who you are when you're not defined by revenge." She pulled out Blackwood's silver revolvers and handed them to me. "Take these. Sell them, keep them, throw them in a river. I don't care, but they're yours by right of conquest. The man who killed the legend gets to keep the trophies." I looked at the silver revolvers, so pretty and so deadly, and thought about all the lives they'd taken. There was a part of me that wanted to destroy them, to make sure they never killed again. But there was another part that understood they were just tools, no more evil than a hammer or a knife. It was the hand that wielded them that mattered. "Thank you, Marshall." "Sarah. My name is Sarah. And you're welcome, 2 wolves running. Now get out of here before I change my mind." I left Skull Ridge that afternoon, riding Silent Thunder down the mountain with Blackwood's silver revolvers wrapped in cloth and stowed in my saddlebags. The sun was setting behind me, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, and I tried not to see it as some kind of symbol. The world was full of signs if you looked for them, but sometimes a sunset was just a sunset. The ride back to Redemption's Fall took 2 days, and I spent them thinking about Marshall Redding's question. Who was I now that my revenge was complete? For 4 years I'd been 2 wolves running, the survivor, the weapon forged in the fires of loss. But that purpose was gone now, burned away in the thunder of gunfire and the smell of black powder smoke. What remained? I stopped on the second night at the same place where Marshall Redding and I had camped on our way north. I built a small fire this time, not caring if anyone saw it. The stars came out one by one, and I found myself speaking to them like my father used to say the old ones did. "I killed him," I said to the night sky, "the man who murdered you, who took everything from me. His name was Silas Blackwood, and he was fast, maybe the fastest who ever lived. But I was faster, I was better, I made him pay for what he did." The stars didn't answer, but I didn't expect them to. The dead stayed dead, and all the revenge in the world wouldn't bring them back. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was to make sure their deaths meant something, to ensure that evil didn't go unpunished, that monsters didn't get to walk free forever. I don't know what to do now, I admitted to the darkness. I've been so focused on killing him that I forgot how to be anything else. Father, if you can hear me, if there's any part of you still in this world, tell me what to do. Tell me how to carry on. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and sage, and in it I thought I heard my father's voice. Not literally. I wasn't that far gone, but a memory of something he'd told me once when I was young and angry about some childhood injustice. Anger is a tool, little wolf, not a purpose. Use it to protect, to fight for justice, but never let it use you. A warrior's true strength isn't in how much he can destroy, but in what he chooses to protect. What did I want to protect? The question haunted me through the rest of the night and into the morning when I broke camp and continued toward Redemption's Fall. By the time the town came into view, I still didn't have an answer, but I knew I needed to find one. Living for revenge was over. Learning to live for something else was just beginning. I rode into town around noon, and the first thing I noticed was the crowd gathered around the telegraph office. News traveled fast in the territories, and apparently word of Blackwood's death had already reached Redemption's Fall. Men were celebrating in the streets, buying each other drinks, and generally acting like some great evil had been lifted from the world. They weren't wrong. I stabled Silent Thunder at the livery and made my way to Ezekiel Crow's place. It had been 4 years since I'd left his cabin, but I knew he'd still be there. Men like Ezekiel didn't move until death moved them. The 2-day ride to his cabin felt longer than it should have, weighted down by everything that had happened, everything that had changed. When I reached his door and knocked, he answered immediately, like he'd been expecting me. His one good eye studied me carefully, taking in the new scars, the harder edge to my bearing, the way my hands never strayed far from my revolvers. "You killed him," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Good. Come in. You look like you could use a drink and a conversation, not necessarily in that order." Inside, the cabin was exactly as I remembered it. Pelts hanging from the walls, weapons in every corner, and the ever-present smell of whiskey and wood smoke. Ezekiel poured us both generous measures and gestured to a chair. I sat, and for a long moment, we just drank in silence. "Tell me," he finally said. So I did. I told him everything from the moment I left his cabin 4 years ago to the confrontation at Skull Ridge. He listened without interruption, occasionally refilling our glasses, his scarred face giving nothing away. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You did well, better than well. You became what I trained you to be. But now you're asking yourself what comes next. You're wondering if there's anything more to you than the need to kill." He leaned forward. "Let me tell you something about legends, boy. Silas Blackwood became the Pale Reaper because he let killing define him. He was so good at death that he forgot how to be anything else. You got a choice now. You can become the man who killed Blackwood and let that define you forever, or you can decide to be something more." "What did you choose?" I asked. "After you were a gunfighter, after Tombstone, what did you become?" "A teacher, a hermit, a drunk. Take your pick." He smiled without humor. "The truth is, I didn't choose. I just drifted, and drift isn't the same as living. Don't make my mistakes, boy. Find something worth fighting for that isn't revenge. Find someone worth protecting. Find a reason to live instead of just reasons to kill." I thought about that as I finished my drink. The silver revolvers in my saddlebags felt heavy, like they were pulling me towards something I couldn't quite see yet. What would I fight for? What would I protect? "The Crimson Company," I said slowly. "They're still out there. Marshal Redding found evidence of their crimes at Skull Ridge, but one camp doesn't mean the whole company goes down. There are probably dozens of places like that across the territories, places where they're destroying lives in the name of profit." Ezekiel raised an eyebrow. "You thinking about going after them? I'm thinking there are people who need protection from predators like Blackwood and the companies that hire them. I'm thinking I have skills that could help. I'm thinking maybe the warrior's path isn't just about revenge. Maybe it's about standing between the innocent and the evil that would harm them. Now you're talking sense. A protector instead of just an avenger. That's something worth being. He stood and walked to a chest in the corner, pulling out a leather vest with intricate beadwork. This was your father's. He gave it to me for safekeeping years ago, said he wanted you to have it when you became a man. I think you've more than earned it. I took the vest with trembling hands. It smelled like sage and old leather, and I could remember my father wearing it during ceremonies. Putting it on felt like putting on a piece of him, a connection to who I'd been before Bitter Creek and who I might still become after. Thank you, Ezekiel, for everything. Don't thank me yet. The path you're talking about, being a protector, that's harder than revenge. Revenge has a clear endpoint, protection is endless, but maybe that's the point. Maybe living isn't about reaching a destination. Maybe it's about choosing to walk a hard path because it's the right one. I left Ezekiel's cabin the next morning, riding silent thunder toward an uncertain future. Behind me was the boy who died in Bitter Creek and the weapon forged to avenge him. Ahead was something new, something I'd have to discover one day at a time. 6 months later, I found myself in a small mining town called Silver Hollow, 3 territories west of Redemption's Fall. The Crimson Company was trying to force out independent prospectors again, using the same tactics they'd employed at Skull Ridge. Intimidation, violence, mysterious accidents that weren't accidents at all. They'd hired a new gunfighter to replace Blackwood, a man called the Rattlesnake Kid, who liked to hurt people before he killed them. I'd heard about it through the network of contacts I'd been building. Turned out there were a lot of people in the territories who needed help against powerful men with guns and money. Marshal Sarah Redding had spread the word about what I'd done at Skull Ridge, and my reputation had grown faster than I'd expected. Some called me a hero, others called me a vigilante. I didn't much care what they called me as long as I could do the work. The Rattlesnake Kid was in the saloon when I arrived, holding court with a group of Crimson Company enforcers. He was younger than Blackwood, maybe 25, with the kind of pretty boy looks that probably made him popular with women and angry with men. He wore 2 nickel-plated revolvers and an arrogant smile that said he'd never met his equal. He was wrong about that. I walked into the saloon and the conversations died one by one as people recognized me. Not 2 wolves running anymore. They'd started calling me something else. The Ghost Walker. The man who'd killed the Pale Reaper and then vanished like smoke. The man who showed up wherever evil thought it could operate with impunity. The Rattlesnake Kid turned to face me, his smile widening. Well, the famous Ghost Walker. I was wondering when you'd show up. They say you killed Silas Blackwood. They say correctly. That's supposed to scare me? Blackwood was old news, past his prime. I'm faster, meaner, and a whole lot prettier. He stood up, his hands hovering over his nickel-plated guns. You walk away now and maybe I let you live. Maybe. I didn't walk away. I never did. Instead, I stood there in my father's vest with Blackwood's silver revolvers on my hips and looked at this young fool who thought being fast with a gun made him immortal. I'd been him once, angry and certain and convinced of my own righteousness. The difference was, I'd learned that speed wasn't enough. You needed purpose. You needed to be fighting for something bigger than your own ego. Last chance, I said quietly. Leave Silver Hollow. Tell the Crimson Company this town is under my protection. Find honest work, and maybe you live to see 30. Or what? You'll shoot me? He laughed. Boy, I've killed men in 6 territories. Killed them fast, killed them slow, killed them crying for their mothers. You don't scare me. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just telling you how this ends. Draw! He drew, and he was fast. Might have even been faster than Blackwood in pure speed. But I'd learned something in the 6 months since Skull Ridge. I'd learned that the true warrior doesn't need to be the fastest. He just needs to be inevitable. While the Rattlesnake Kid was trying to impress, trying to prove something, I was simply doing what needed to be done. My silver revolvers cleared leather, and the thunder of gunfire filled the saloon. The Rattlesnake Kid got off 3 shots. All of them went wide because he was shooting to kill, shooting with rage and ego. I fired once from each revolver. Both bullets found their mark, and the Rattlesnake Kid joined the long list of men who'd underestimated what they were facing. As he fell, I felt no satisfaction, no joy. Just a tired acceptance that this was my path now. I would walk through the territories, standing between the innocent and those who would harm them. I would face gunfighters and murderers, and I would keep facing them until either they were all gone, or I was. It wasn't the life I'd have chosen, but it was the life I'd been given. The Crimson Company enforcers in the saloon looked at each other, then at me, then at the door. They chose wisely, filing out without a word. Within an hour, they'd broken camp and left Silver Hollow entirely. The independent prospectors could work their claims in peace now, at least for a while. I was leaving town the next morning when I saw a young boy watching me from beside the general store. He couldn't have been more than 10, with dark eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen too much hardship too young. He reminded me of who I'd been before Bitter Creek. "You're the Ghost Walker," he said. It wasn't a question. "Some call me that. You killed the bad man. You saved our town. I did what needed doing." He stepped closer, his expression serious beyond his years. "When I grow up, I want to be like you, fast and strong and brave." I knelt down so we were eye to eye. "If you want to be like me, don't be fast. Be just. Don't be strong. Be kind. Don't be brave. Be wise. And most importantly, protect the innocent, not because it makes you a legend, but because it's the right thing to do. Can you do that?" He nodded solemnly. "I can try." "Then you're already better than I was at your age." I stood and walked to Silent Thunder. Before I mounted, I turned back to the boy. "What's your name?" "Samuel." "Well, Samuel, you remember what I told you. The world has enough ghost walkers. What it needs is more good men who choose justice over revenge, protection over violence. You be that man." I rode out of Silver Hollow as the sun climbed toward noon, and I thought about the boy I'd been, the weapon I'd become, and the protector I was still learning to be. Silas Blackwood was dead, but the evil he represented would never truly die. There would always be more Rattlesnake Kids, more Crimson Companies, more people who thought power and violence gave them the right to hurt others. And as long as there were predators, there would need to be someone to stand against them. I looked up at the sky, at the sun burning bright and clean in the endless blue, and I thought about my family, about my father who'd taught me to be a warrior, my mother who'd taught me to be compassionate, my sister who'd taught me to be brave. They were gone, but they weren't forgotten. Every time I stood between an innocent and evil, every time I chose protection over revenge, I honored their memory. This was my path now, not the one I'd planned, not the one I'd wanted, but the one I'd chosen. And if I had to walk it alone, if I had to face 100 gunfighters and 1,000 bad men, then so be it. I was 2 wolves running, the Ghost Walker, the man who killed the Pale Reaper. But more than that, I was a warrior, and a warrior's job is never done. The road stretched out before me, and somewhere ahead, someone needed help. Someone needed protection. Someone needed a ghost to stand between them in the darkness. I rode toward that somewhere, toward whatever came next, with my father's vest on my back and silver revolvers on my hips. The legend of the fastest gun in the West had died at Skull Ridge, but a new legend was just beginning, and this one would be written in protection, not just revenge. If you enjoyed this epic tale of vengeance and redemption set in the Old West, please subscribe to the channel and share this video with fellow lovers of Western stories. Your support helps us create more content like this. What did you think of Two Wolves Running's journey? Let us know in the comments below and tell us what story you'd like to hear next. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss our next adventure.